At 5 a.m. on the 22nd day of month 0 in 1998, locals exercising around the area of Lake Dean, Kunming City, Yunnan Province, were deeply curious about the unexpected appearance of a police patrol car in this location. For over 2 days, no one knew what had happened or if there was a case here, but the police car had remained parked for such a long time. Strangely, no officers were seen anywhere nearby. Some people speculated that the car might have encountered some kind of problem since the rear door was left slightly ajar. Li Guishu, 63 years old, a retired police officer, happened to be exercising and passed by the area. After quietly observing for a while, Shu felt utterly puzzled. During his decades of service in the force, he had never seen a state-owned vehicle abandoned so irresponsibly. Based on its license plate, it was clear that this car belonged to the Yunnan Provincial Public Security Bureau. Moving closer and calling out, Shu was met with nothing but eerie silence. Signaling others to remain quiet, Shu carefully approached the car. Stranger still, the closer he got, the stronger the unbearable stench emanating from the car became. It smelled exactly like the decomposing carcass of an animal. Even more disturbing, through the slightly open rear door, Li Guishu could see a swarm of flies buzzing densely. How could a police vehicle be left in such an unhygienic and filthy state? What struck Li Guishu's eyes was the sight of 2 adults lying motionless, stacked on top of each other, in the backseat of the patrol car. Their faces were crushed and smeared with dried blood. Furthermore, their arms were tied behind their backs. In this state, it wasn't difficult for Shu to determine that the 2 victims had already died. Upon receiving Shu's report, the Kunming City Police were immediately dispatched to the scene. A preliminary inspection revealed 2 deceased individuals inside the patrol car, 1 male and 1 female. The condition of their deaths was horrifying. Their heads and faces were completely deformed, crushed, and severely mutilated, while their bodies were in an advanced state of decomposition. Both arms of the victims were tied behind their backs using women's underwear. Forensic examination also uncovered a total of 4 bullet wounds on the victims' chests, fired at very close range. Ballistic testing confirmed that the bullets were from a Type 77 pistol, which is exclusively issued to the Yunnan Provincial Criminal Police Force. In addition to these clues, the investigators made another significant discovery. The way the victims had been dressed before their deaths was highly unusual. Both had disheveled and untidy clothing. The man hadn't even managed to put his underwear back on. Moreover, forensic experts found a large amount of bodily fluid, suspected to be semen, in the genital area of the female victim. It is highly likely that the 2 individuals died immediately after engaging in sexual intercourse. Although their faces were disfigured and deformed, an unexpected discovery helped the investigators quickly identify the deceased. Upon inspection, they found 2 police identification cards, known in Vietnam as sector cards, in the pockets of the victims. The information on the cards revealed that the man was Wang Junba, 30 years old, Deputy Director of the Public Security Bureau of Chishan District. The woman was Wang Xiaotong, also 30 years old, a police officer working in the media department of the Kunming City Public Security Bureau. The brutal attack on 2 police officers inside the patrol car had a profoundly negative impact on public opinion. Many baseless rumors spread, causing extreme panic and fear among the people. Even the leadership of the Chinese Ministry of Public Security at that time expressed great concern and outrage over the seriousness of the case and the cold-blooded methods used by the perpetrator. The ministry directly instructed the Yunnan Provincial Public Security Bureau to immediately launch an investigation and resolve the case as quickly as possible to quell the growing public unrest and restore justice and dignity for the nation's law enforcement agencies. However, during the initial investigation and assessment, the Yunnan Provincial Public Security Bureau encountered many challenges in determining the cause and motive behind the deaths of these 2 young officers. Notably, at the time of the incident, both victims were off-duty. They were not assigned to any patrol duties involving the use of official vehicles on the road along Lake Dian. Moreover, Wang Xiaotang's department, the media department of the Kunming City Public Security Bureau, had no connection to the patrol or criminal suppression duties of Wang Junba, Deputy Director of the Public Security Bureau of Chishan District. Another detail was that both officers were dressed in civilian clothing, not in their official uniforms as required by regulations. This indicated that they had misused the official vehicle for personal purposes at the time of the murder. The question arises: Why did Wang Xiaotong appear in Wang Junba's patrol car on the night of April 20th? And what was the true nature of the relationship between these two individuals? Under pressure from the ministry's leadership, the director of the Yunnan Provincial Public Security Bureau summoned senior investigator Ning Xinghua, head of the criminal investigation team of the Municipal Public Security Bureau, to hand over the entire case to this officer, known as the nemesis of crime, for full oversight. Taking on the mission, Ning Xinghua immediately began his work with an unprecedented determination to solve the case. On the night of April 22nd, the task force led by Xinghua urgently investigated all social connections surrounding the two ill-fated victims to quickly piece together the motives and conflicts that led to their gruesome deaths. As for Wang Junba, during the process of studying his file, investigator Ning Xinghua and his team were deeply impressed by the career of this exceptional young officer. After graduating with top honors from the police academy, Wang Junba was assigned to the Qishan District Public Security Bureau. Starting as a young criminal investigator, he rose through the ranks to become the deputy director in less than 10 years, reaching this position before the age of 30. Throughout his career, before his tragic death, Junba had participated in numerous dangerous cases and earned countless distinguished achievements. During his time serving in the police force, Wang Junba was always a model officer, respected, trusted, and admired by his colleagues. In fact, due to his dedication to work, he had not even started a family. However, with Wang Junba's remarkable achievements in combating highly dangerous criminal activities, this also meant that he would inevitably become the enemy and arch-nemesis of numerous underground organizations and gangs. Based on this reasoning, it is highly plausible that he was being monitored and ultimately attacked and murdered by criminal organizations seeking revenge. As for Wang Xiaotong, the female victim was equally as renowned as Deputy Director Wang Junba. She was also well-trained and graduated with a bachelor's degree from the police academy. Shortly after being assigned to her local post, Wang Xiaotong demonstrated exceptional abilities in the field of information and communications. With her attractive appearance, confidence, and distinctive personality, Xiaotong even won first place in a beauty pageant organized by the Yunnan Provincial Public Security Bureau. However, one key difference between Xiaotong and Junba was that right after graduating, she got married and had a lovely baby girl. Xiaotong's husband, Du Piwu, 30 years old, is also a police officer and currently works at the city's drug rehabilitation center. Even more surprising, through their investigation of records, the investigators discovered that Du Piwu and Wang Junba had been classmates during their time at the police academy. Nevertheless, with only this information, it is still entirely insufficient to explain why Xiaotong was in Junba's patrol car on the night the murder occurred. Even the fact that the clothing of both individuals was disheveled and untidy before their deaths remained a significant mystery to the investigators. However, after examining the semen sample found in Wang Xiaotong's vagina, the investigative team finally unraveled the puzzle. Surpassing all initial expectations, the owner of the semen was none other than Wang Junba himself. Life can indeed be unfair, betraying even a best friend's trust with his wife. With this discovery, team leader Ning Xinghua and his associates quickly leaned toward the theory that the couple's death was likely driven by hatred stemming from a love affair. Du Piwu, Wang Xiaotong's husband, soon became the prime suspect in the investigation. This assumption could easily be justified by the evidence collected and analyzed at the crime scene. First, as previously mentioned, Wang Junba, with his rigorous training and nearly 10 years of experience, was famously skilled in shooting and handling military-grade weapons. He was even the top student in the military and martial arts program at the police academy. With such a competent and capable officer, it would have been extremely difficult, if not impossible, for ordinary individuals, or even hardened criminals, to approach and attack him, let alone overpower him in the confined space of a patrol car. However, the case was entirely different with Du Piwu. Consider this. Also a formally trained graduate of the police academy, fueled by intense hatred and uncontrollable rage upon discovering his wife's betrayal with his best friend, Du Piwu could easily transform into a cold-blooded and ruthless individual capable of such an act. Secondly, during the forensic examination of the crime scene, technicians did not recover a single trace of biological evidence inside the patrol car. Even the smallest fingerprint was nowhere to be found. If an ordinary person had committed the crime of murdering two individuals in such a confined space, how could they have possibly erased all traces so skillfully? Thirdly, while it seems that Du Piwu might have been meticulous in cleaning up the scene, he appeared to have overlooked one crucial detail: the way he used Xiaotang's underwear to bind the victims' arms behind their backs. Through analysis, evaluation, and comparison, it was evident that the method of binding and restraining used was a technique only police officers are trained in. Ordinary individuals would not be able to execute such complex knots. Fourthly, and most importantly, on the night of the murder, according to his work schedule, Du Piwu was supposed to be present at the drug rehabilitation center. However, upon investigation, Piwu's colleagues confirmed that from the evening of April 20th, he was not seen at the center. It wasn't until the early morning of the following day that he returned to the briefing room, appearing exhausted. Piwu had dark circles under his eyes and kept yawning, as if he had been awake all night. Notably, right after the meeting concluded, he unexpectedly submitted a leave request and hurriedly left the center, looking extremely anxious and worried. Some colleagues and friends approached him with concern, but he only gave a faint smile and refused to answer. With this information, Ning Xinghua and his subordinates immediately arrived at Du Piwu's workplace to plan the apprehension of this particularly dangerous suspect. However, to ensure the safety of the special task force in the face of Vu's potentially reckless behavior, especially given suspicions that he had stolen the Type 77 pistol that Wang Junba always carried, Hua and the director of the Drug Rehabilitation Center devised a highly detailed plan. Although the director had just approved Vu's personal leave request, he immediately instructed the assistant driver to go to Vu's residence and summon him back to the unit for an emergency meeting. Unexpectedly, as soon as the center's vehicle arrived at his house, they found Vu rushing out in a panic. His face was pale, and he seemed extremely anxious, telling the driver that his wife, Wang Xiaotong, had gone missing and that he couldn't contact her. Since the purpose of the trip to fetch Vu had not been disclosed, the driver was equally surprised by Vu's panicked demeanor. However, in response to the urgent order from the unit's leadership, Du Piwu obediently got into the car, complying with his superior's command without any questions or doubts. Little did Vu know that the destination of this trip was not the drug rehabilitation center but the headquarters of the investigative agency, where his descent into hell on earth was about to begin. As soon as the car reached the gate, before he could grasp the situation, Du Piwu was ambushed and subdued by the special task force that had been lying in wait. In the interrogation room, facing the experienced team leader Ning Xinghua, Du Piwu maintained a resolute demeanor and a cold expression. In fact, he didn't even know about the tragic deaths of Wang Xiaotong and Wang Junba on the fateful night of April 20th, 3 days ago. It wasn't until he was shown photographs of the victims taken in the patrol car by investigators that Vu broke down, crying bitterly at the sudden and painful loss of his wife. He even repeatedly begged team leader Hua to release him so he could see his wife one last time. However, despite Vu's pleading and sorrowful demeanor, Ning Xinghua still believed that he was merely putting on an act to deceive the authorities. When Hua refused his request, Vu became enraged and tried to break free. It took considerable effort from the police officers present to subdue and pin the suspect down onto the table. Rather than being concerned about Vu's agitation, Ning Xinghua laughed loudly and said, "There it is. That's exactly it. When a person is pushed to their limits, they reveal their true strength. Look at him. Just one Vu, and it took 4 officers to restrain him. No wonder Wang Junba was overpowered so quickly." Despite hours of intense interrogation, Du Piwu adamantly denied any involvement in the case. When asked where he was, what he was doing at the time of the murder, and why he was absent from the drug rehabilitation center as scheduled, he calmly explained, "That day was Monday, my duty day at the center." However, during dinner, some colleagues organized a small party in the dormitory. Since I don't drink alcohol and was focused on preparing for my law degree exams at the Central University, I didn't join them. Instead, I went to the canteen for a meal, then brought my files to the conference room behind the service building to study in peace until early the next morning. It's likely because of this that my colleagues misunderstood and assumed I had left the center on the night my wife was murdered. However, upon further inspection, the large conference hall of the Drug Rehabilitation Center was found to lack any security surveillance cameras, rendering all of Vu's statements unacceptable to Ning Xinghua. Continuing the interrogation, Vu was questioned. Why, after 2 whole days and nights of losing contact with his wife, did he show no signs of worry or anxiety? Why did he wait until the early morning of April 22nd to file a leave request and return home? Was his prolonged stay at the Drug Rehabilitation Center part of a plan to create an alibi? In response, Du Piwu simply gave a faint smile and calmly replied. Due to the specific nature of the drug rehabilitation center, this wasn't the first time I had been on duty for such an extended period. As for why I didn't appear worried when I couldn't reach my wife for 2 days, that's entirely wrong. Completely wrong. I was worried, I was anxious. In fact, I made dozens of calls to Wang Xiaotong from my phone. However, the center is located deep within a mountainous area where telecommunication signals are extremely weak. I simply thought that poor signal reception was the reason I couldn't reach her. Although Vu's answer was logical and showed no apparent inconsistencies, team leader Ning Xinghua remained convinced that Du Piwu, as a trained police officer and graduate of the police academy, was well versed in interrogation tactics and psychological strategies. Everything he said could very well have been meticulously calculated. If only standard methods were used, it would be extremely difficult to unmask and expose the brutal murderer. Thus, Hua decided to ask one final question to challenge the stubborn officer. Although in reality, the question might spark controversy and is not typically permitted during interrogation, especially when employing psychological pressure on a suspect. After repeatedly mocking, taunting, and probing into the extramarital affair between Wang Xiaotong and Wang Junba in front of Du Piwu, Ning Xinghua also brought out the lab report confirming the presence of Wang Junba's semen in Wang Xiaotong's body to provoke and challenge Vu. As expected, upon reading the content of the report, Du Piwu became a completely different person. He cried, screamed, cursed, and even hurled vulgar insults at Wang Junba. All of these reactions were recorded by Ning Xinghua's assistant as evidence for evaluation. However, after an exhausting day of questioning, despite taking turns to interrogate him, the task force under Ning Xinghua's command still failed to uncover any useful leads. Consequently, they decided to lock the detention room and go out for dinner, leaving Du Piwu to stew in his anger and despair, alone in the darkness surrounded by 4 walls. Around 11 p.m., after a full meal, Ning Xinghua returned to the unit. This time, he was accompanied by 2 close investigators, subordinates who had previously served under Wang Junba's command. As soon as the door to the detention cell was opened, without giving Vu a chance to react, Hua directed his 2 subordinates to relentlessly confront and interrogate the suspect. This time, instead of patiently recording statements, the interrogation tactics of the investigative team completely changed. Punches, kicks, even electric batons and handcuffs were used relentlessly. Yet, unexpectedly, Du Piwu proved to be incredibly stubborn, so much so that his obstinacy bordered on defiance. Despite enduring constant physical abuse and coercion, Vu steadfastly refused to confess to the crime. The interrogation only ended after the 3 investigators were utterly exhausted, while Vu lay collapsed in a corner, his body covered in countless bruises and injuries. It seemed like the hell on earth he endured would finally end after that fateful night, but no, things were far from over. For days afterward, Ning Xinghua and the investigators in charge of the case took turns employing every technique and professional tactic they could think of to extract a confession from Du Piwu, hoping he would admit to his alleged crime. By the 10th day, due to Du Piwu's deteriorating health and increasing pressure from his family, Ning Xinghua reluctantly decided to temporarily suspend the case and release Du Piwu. However, in reality, investigators were stationed around his residence 24/7. This was effectively a form of house arrest for a man who, in the eyes of many, was still presumed innocent. Although Vu's family had filed reports and appeals to his workplace and relevant authorities, for some reason, none of these petitions received any response. After a period of rest and recovery from his injuries at home, Vu returned to the drug rehabilitation center to resume his work as usual. However, just half a month after his temporary detention by the investigation team, the attitudes of his colleagues and friends at the center had completely changed. No one initiated conversations with Vu. If they did, it was merely perfunctory greetings before quickly walking away, as if avoiding a dangerous virus. His dormitory room at the staff quarters was relocated by the leadership to a separate, isolated area, far from the living quarters of other officers. Moreover, the promotion file that Vu had diligently worked on for nearly 10 years was inexplicably suspended and returned without any explanation. Even during mealtimes, his food portions were noticeably smaller and less tidy than others, and his usual seat in the canteen was moved to a far corner. Although the sympathetic glances from his colleagues hinted that they understood and empathized with his plight, they dared not show it openly. With Ning Xinghua's surveillance and investigative team closely monitoring Vu's every move, no one wanted to risk appearing close to a suspect in an ongoing investigation. While they may have genuinely felt pity for him, behind them were their own families, parents, spouses, and livelihoods to consider. So, they had no choice but to turn a blind eye to the injustice that Vu was enduring. The case of Wang Xiaotong and Wang Junba's murders remained at a standstill, unresolved for 2 whole months, with no further progress. Under increasing pressure from the ministry's leadership and the director of the Provincial Public Security Bureau, Ning Xinghua decided to take a bold step by drafting a proposal to request permission to use a polygraph, commonly known as a lie detector, during the interrogation of the suspect. Unexpectedly, this proposal was quickly approved by the Provincial Bureau's leadership. On the morning of June 30th, Du Piwu was escorted by the investigative team to the Intermediate People's Court in Kunming City for the test. Inside the office, 2 officers were already waiting. After carefully attaching the wires connected to the polygraph to Vu's head and chest, Ning Xinghua and his team began the session with questions unrelated to the case, such as asking Vu about his name, address, work history, and personal interests. The method for using this device is relatively straightforward. After receiving the suspect's response, the polygraph evaluates the data based on sensors monitoring breathing rate, blood pressure, pulse, and sweat levels. If the result is below 4 points, it indicates that the suspect, Du Piwu, is telling the truth. If the result exceeds 4 points, it signifies that Vu is lying, and the device will emit a beeping sound. The initial phase of the test yielded very favorable results for the suspect. Every answer Vu provided registered below 4 points, demonstrating that he had been truthful. However, Ning Xinghua was visibly furious and dissatisfied with these results. Worried that the device might be malfunctioning, he repeatedly asked the same question multiple times to compare and cross-check the responses. This only further frustrated Du Piwu, who expressed strong opposition to such actions. Unexpectedly, Piwu's protest was met with a series of forceful slaps from Ning Xinghua. As the interrogation approached questions crucial to the case, Xinghua became increasingly agitated and anxious. Notably, he resorted to using an electric baton and a wet towel pressed against Piwu's genitals to coerce him whenever the device showed low scores. The 2 police officers present in the room silently turned a blind eye to the brutal torture Xinghua was inflicting on Piwu. Perhaps overwhelmed by rage and unable to control his emotions, Piwu's subsequent answers began scoring 4 or above, causing the polygraph to emit its harsh, relentless beeping sounds. From June 30th to July 1st, under Xinghua's orders, his subordinates worked in 3 shifts, each lasting 8 hours, to relentlessly interrogate Du Piwu. Each time Piwu denied the accusations, he faced various forms of torture, from electric shocks and waterboarding to being handcuffed and suspended upside down from a window frame, leaving his wrists bloodied and nearly necrotic. As an exceptional police officer and graduate of the police academy, Du Piwu initially refused to yield to the abusive actions of Ning Xinghua and his team. However, by July 5th, realizing he could no longer endure the immense physical and psychological torment, Piwu finally confessed. He admitted to killing Wang Xiaotong and Wang Junba in the patrol car, motivated by revenge after discovering his wife's affair with his best friend. After obediently confessing, Vu was transferred to the detention center to await trial. Freed from Ning Xinghua's cold-blooded grip, he felt as though he had returned from the brink of death. Once he recovered mentally and regained his clarity, Vu, seeing his body covered in scars, began initiating conversations with the correctional officers and pleading for their help. Pham Tien Trung, a rehabilitation officer at the detention center, agreed to assist Vu after hearing his story. Trung helped him draft a report and file a complaint against Ning Xinghua for the crimes of torture, abuse, and coercion. To gather further evidence and legal support, Trung summoned all inmates present in the cell and other correctional officers to witness him taking 4 photographs of the severe scars and injuries on Vu's body using his old phone. However, for reasons unknown, Trung's complaint received no response. Worse still, he was reassigned to a different unit by the Public Security Bureau's leadership and stripped of all his current positions. On December 17th, the public trial of Du Piwu commenced. Confronted with the prosecutor's accusations and the evidence presented by the investigative team, Vu outright rejected the charges and directly accused Ning Xinghua of torturing, abusing, and coercing him into confessing. He insisted that he had no involvement in the deaths of the 2 victims. The trial became more tense and complex than ever. Under the pressure of public opinion and a formidable legal defense team, the judge and jury were forced to postpone proceedings multiple times for further deliberations. However, Ning Xinghua, the team leader, remained untouchable, bearing no responsibility for the case. It wasn't until January 15 of the following year that the second trial was held. To everyone's surprise, when the judge requested that Du Piwu provide evidence proving he had been tortured and coerced by the investigative team and Ning Xinghua, Pham Thien Trung failed to appear. Even the 4 photographs Vu had presented during the previous trial mysteriously vanished without a trace. Without evidence to substantiate his claims of torture by Ning Xinghua and the investigation team, Du Piwu's appeal was dismissed. Based on the available evidence, especially the polygraph results presented by the investigators, the Intermediate People's Court of Kunming sentenced Du Piwu to death and permanently revoked all his political rights for the crime of premeditated murder. Standing in the dock, Vu was stunned into silence. Yet, he neither screamed nor panicked, nor did he show fear. Instead, he stood tall, offering only a bitter smile, a smile of resignation from a powerless man trapped in a corrupt and broken system. Witnessing their only son suffering from such injustice, Du Piwu's parents repeatedly filed petitions and appeals to government agencies and reputable newspapers, pleading for assistance. However, just like before, none of these efforts received any response. In the detention center, the execution date loomed ever closer. Watching other inmates leave one by one, Du Piwu was left wondering when it would be his turn. The feeling of sitting and waiting for death to call his name was nothing short of cruel and excruciating. But finally, light returned to the life of this unfortunate man. On October 20, 1999, the relentless efforts of Du Piwu's parents paid off. The Yunnan Provincial Supreme People's Court, after reviewing the case file and evaluating Vu's contributions and dedication to protecting the interests of the people, agreed to postpone his execution for 2 years. Vu was transferred from the execution site to Yunnan Provincial Prison No. 1 for reformation through labor. It seemed that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars, but unexpectedly, this was only the first glimpse of hope in his journey to reclaim justice. After more than 8 months of diligent labor and reform, Du Piwu was overjoyed to receive the news that the Kunming Public Security Bureau had successfully dismantled a major criminal case. Even more astonishingly, the mastermind behind the case confessed that he was the one who directly killed Wang Junba and Wang Xiaotong on the night of April 20, into the early hours of April 21, 1998, while leading his gang of robbers. Furthermore, Wang Junba's missing Type 77 pistol was found in the mastermind's safe. Due to time constraints, we'll cover the details of this case in the next episode. For now, let's return to the journey of Du Piwu in reclaiming justice, backed by objective evidence and concrete proof. Notably, when compared to the interrogation record that Ning Xinghua coerced Vu into signing, it became clear that the claim about Wang Junba's gun being stolen, disassembled, and its parts thrown into Lake Dian by Du Piwu to destroy evidence was completely fabricated. After more than a year of enduring injustice, Du Piwu was finally released by the Yunnan Provincial People's Court, with all his political rights and his position at his workplace fully restored. A medical examination revealed that the injuries and scars on Vu's body were inflicted by Ning Xinghua and his subordinates during coercive interrogations. Moreover, a portion of Du Piwu's brain had shrunk due to the psychological torture he had been subjected to by Xinghua. However, despite these findings, Vu was awarded only 30,000 yuan in compensation according to legal regulations. As for Ning Xinghua, he received merely a 1-year prison sentence for torture, abuse, and coercion during interrogations. Justice had finally been served, but fairness remained an elusive concept for Du Piwu and his family. What are your thoughts on this case? Feel free to leave your opinions in the comments section below for everyone to discuss. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel to support and stay tuned for more content from the Whisper of the Moonlight in the future. Wishing you, your family, friends, and loved ones good health, happiness, and success. Thank you, and see you in the next episode.